Welcome to Ambition Today, a podcast show discussing with other entrepreneurial and ambitious people what it means to achieve success, grow your startup, try to change the world, and accomplish your goals today. On episode 4, we are joined by Shahab Kaviani, co-founder of CoFoundersLab, and now on to his third startup. He is the co-founder of Breezio. Breezio is a collaboration platform for research scientists to accelerate discoveries through team science. Be sure to subscribe to Ambition Today in the iTunes Store, Stitcher for Android, SoundCloud, or now watch us on YouTube. Today's episode of Ambition Today is brought to you by Audible.com. Visit audibletrial.com/ambitiontoday to download and keep any audiobook for free. This is Ambition Today.
Looking to make your dreams come true? Needing that extra push to become more successful? Then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Ambition Today with your host, Kevin Siskar.
What's up, world? I am Kevin Siskar, and you are listening to Ambition Today. You can find me on Twitter at @thesiskar or online at www.siskar.co. On today's program, we have Shahab Kaviani, co-founder of CoFoundersLab and now Breezio. CoFoundersLab is a global organization helping entrepreneurs find their co-founder and launch lasting new businesses together. CoFoundersLab is now the largest community of entrepreneurs in the world with more than 60,000 members online, events in 40 cities, and about 60 volunteers. Last year, CoFoundersLab merged with a company called OneVest, an equity crowdfunding platform, so that founders can go to one place for talent and capital. Shahab, welcome to the show. First off, I just want to say thank you for being a mentor at the Founder Institute the last few years. That's how we know each other. How's it going today?
It's going great, Kevin. Thanks for having me. It's a beautiful fall day here in New York City. Just pulled in from Washington, D.C. I'm staring out the window at the Empire State Building, and
I know, right?
Excited to do my first podcast with you.
I know, it's a great view here at Next Jump. All right, cool. So let's jump into it. So I guess one of the things we like to figure out here is what were the early signs of success. So let's take it back to the beginning. What was your background?
So I had studied economics back in school, and I had worked for a couple of companies in the e-learning industry, and it still today is a passion of mine is distributing knowledge and education. But I first caught the entrepreneurial bug out in Silicon Valley. I went and worked for a pre-IPO company that was in the education space called Saba, and I really just sort of fell in love with the culture and the possibilities that were available with the resources and the talent and the ambitious people around me. And I knew I wanted to do something like that. So I was an individual contributor at Saba, and I came over to back home to Maryland, where my whole family is, and I started my very first startup there as a co-founder of a company called Hyperoffice. Okay. And it's a collaboration software company, and from there you sort of learn the ropes and learn new tricks. And I took that, and after operating that for about 8 years, went and started CoFoundersLab.
Okay, great. So taking it back to Saba real quick, so what was the culture like there, and were they embracing of the entrepreneur culture? What gave you the bug from Saba?
Well, Saba was, I was probably employee about number 60 or so, and they had recently gotten capital from Sequoia, and as you know, tier 1 VC company out in the Bay Area.
Yeah. Great firm.
That's right. So they were on the right track. They had all the right ingredients, excellent leadership. In a hot market, e-learning was just kind of coming of age because the internet penetration had reached a certain age. The technology was getting there. I think culturally, we were sort of prepared for that. And so it was just a rocket ship. And everyone in the leadership in the company really encouraged us to go and find faster, better, slicker ways to achieve our jobs. And
which is pretty entrepreneurial in and of itself, as opposed to sit at a desk and do this thing over and over.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we were the company. I would say most everyone's job was evolving every quarter. I mean, they would stack people underneath you. You would move up and sort of create new paths. And so they really encouraged that. The CEO, Bobby Yazdani, who's now a very well recognized angel in the Bay Area, I think helped create that culture of innovation and leadership. And you can see that after you look at the alumni, you'll find at least a dozen that I know of that have gone and started their own company. Okay. So I think that's the type of culture. If until you get to start your own company, being inside a company that nurtures that sort of pedigree and creates new leaders is the environment that really sort of helped spark it for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you left Saba, you went back to Maryland, and then you started Hyperoffice. What were some of the lessons you took? What was the story behind Hyperoffice? What did they do?
So Hyperoffice is a collaboration software company. We think of Google Apps, Microsoft Office 365, but we were doing that before they came into the market. We have a few extra things aside from document sharing, online projects, and mobile mail, email service, and all that is for distributed teams. So it was really all about helping people come together professionally and do work more effectively, knowledge workers, contractors, to do work more effectively. And this was at the dawn of like PPC. So we were just like, we couldn't go.
What year was this?
This is 2003.
Okay.
So we were like, there wasn't, blogs and podcasts about how do you do PPC well? How do you do content marketing?
PPC being for our audience?
Yeah. So audience creation through paid advertising,
Okay.
Google Click Ads. And so we were doing a lot of experimenting online where this, scrappy little startup was 3 other co-founders and I. 2 of them were seasoned entrepreneurs. And that's one lesson I try to pass on is, you can, of course, there are people who have done launch a new startup with 2 rookie founders, but it's better to cut your teeth with having, a couple guys, and they don't have to be, gray haired yet, but they have tried it before, and so you're sort of shadowing with them. And so that really helped sort of develop myself as an entrepreneur significantly. The other thing that I think I took away from Hyperoffice is just being extremely resourceful. I mean, we were and perseverance. So imagine like you're 3 years, 4 years into a company, and Google tries to come eat your lunch.
Yeah, what was that like?
So they came in practically overnight. I mean, they were doing their consumer Gmail service, and then kind of overnight, they just said, "Hey, we're going to do Google for Business." And we definitely shook on our boots for the first few months, but it was a good validation, and we had to figure out a way to differentiate ourselves. And so with any successful startup, if you are successful, you're demonstrating there's a market there. There's going to be some big guys that are going to come in. And one of the things we learned is that when the big guys come in, whether it's an IBM or Microsoft or Google, if we're talking about tech and software, they're trying to message the whole industry. Picture like you're in an exhibition, and you're in a big conference room. You go to these conferences all the time, and there are all these guys boothing, and the small booths are like around in the corners. You got like the 8x10, you paid like $500, and then in the center you got the big guys like Nokia will be there. They got like 3-inch carpets. They got like the whole setup there, yeah. And so they're sort of attracting everybody into that room, and they're trying to make it seem like everybody else is the same. And so when the big guys come in, because if everybody is basically the same and there's not a big differentiator, then the customer is going to go with whoever's the safest.
Right.
So that's their game. So we're basically saying, no, we're not the same as Google Apps, and here's why. So we were constantly trying to out-innovate, out-listen to the market, and really sort of carve our piece of the market. And there were different ways that we could do it through features. There were different ways that our promise to the customer was different. The way we handled the client.
What was the key differentiator you guys came up with over the years? That really was most important to you?
I think the high service, high touch. So we were like, we wouldn't, anybody could call the support. We would customize and tailor the solution where most SaaS businesses aren't designed to have a professional services business line. We didn't do that. We actually had a professional service businesses line. We had account managers. We were customizing. So it was like you go in, you get the tailor-made suit, but then you get all the benefits of software as a service. So that was one big differentiator.
And great customer support. I mean, at that time, how old was Zappos at that time? There wasn't the norm.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't like, now sort of Rackspace changed the game. I think, Apple, a lot of companies, it's the norm, it's expected. But we invested in it, and we're trying to change the culture of a company to adopt these new tools. Everybody kind of wanted to go back to email. So what we were really good at is we came up with communication plans. So it wasn't like people were sort of kicking and screaming to adopt this tool, which is key for any technology. I mean, CRM went through that for the first 7-8 years, where with Salesforce, they would buy it, the enterprise would buy it, it would sit on the shelf. And I think even Google Apps was up against that. But what we did differently was we really came up with creative ways to drive adoption within those accounts. And I think the last thing that we did was we really publicized what Google really wasn't, trying to, flaunt at the time, was how you're treating their data. So the way that they were treating their data and the way we were treating the data was totally different.
Totally different. Yeah, they're like advertising and yeah.
Yeah, they're mining it, and then if you look in the fine print, who owns the data and all that sort of stuff. So we were educating our clients about that. I think we also did a really good job of, again, because of paid advertising, SEO, like back then it was sort of like, it was a game. Like every month you could come up with a new technique, and so it would actually work. That sort of that sport has kind of died.
Yeah, the Google Panda update kind of killed that.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what was the result with Hyperoffice? And are you still there, or how does it end? Or
so I stayed with Hyperoffice for about the first 8 years. And this is something I think is a really important takeaway for any founder, which is, they say you can decide to be rich or you can be king. And so if you want to be king, that means you get to call all the shots, you get to set the culture forever, which is great. But you may not actually be the best person to take the company through every inflection point. And there's a major inflection point at about 100 employees. I've seen firsthand there's an inflection point after about 15 people. And then there are market conditions where you need certain skills and talent. And I had built the company. I was responsible for product management, product marketing, and I built a sales organization. We had, like 10 quota carrying reps, inside sales team. We'd go out for some outside larger contracts, but it was a sort of high volume, create your free trial, sign them up, try to close the account within 17 days was our average closing cycle. And so it was this really high volume, and we were doing direct. So it was B2C. I mean, you're direct selling to the end customer. Right. So the end customer would be, let's say, the owner of a company between 5 to 75 employees.
Okay.
Because otherwise, it's just a lot cheaper to go SaaS, and we had sort of, we had proven that. And so we were selling directly to the end customer. Well, we figured out that we could actually grow faster by selling through channels. So we started finding these resellers. There were like solution providers. A lot of if you got some of the older audience listening, the people that were doing like Microsoft solution providers, guys like that, telecom ISPs that were looking for new product to increase their solution footprint and increase their average revenue per user. And so it was a great match for their business. And so this thing started to take off. And we're like, why are we killing ourselves to go get these customers one by one when we could go get this channel business going?
Yeah, get them in bulk.
And we could get it in bulk. And generally speaking, it's, all things equal, the revenue coming in, the fewer number of the customers is better. Fewer customers, less headaches, less moving parts. So
right. A lot easier to manage.
And so we figured out if we can get this channel thing going, well, it got to a point sort of about year 7 or so, the channel thing really started to pick up, and I was in over my head. And I knew that for Hyperoffice to really become a breakout company, we were like 25 employees at the time. And we were doing a few $1 million. And I knew for us to break out, we had to get this channel thing going. So basically what I did was I said, you know what, we got to really double down on this. I've kind of taken the company as far as I feel like I can take it. And I think this is a time to sort of upgrade me and get somebody seasoned that knows how to build channels and let them run the strategy and get out of the way. Because I think as a co-founder, it's sort of hard to do that. Some people can find ways to kind of fit in and maybe report into it. Not my style. I'm the driver. I want to lead it, and so I knew that about myself.
So what's that like, that moment where you decide that as a founder? Because I have to think that's got to take a massive level of maturity and insight. And then what was the result with Hypergrowth? And then just real quick, because I want to get on to your next company and make sure we have time to talk about
Sure. So first is you have to have the strong founding team. My co-founders, if they weren't as strong as they were, and executing as well as they were, I wouldn't have had the guts to do that. So that's one, is you have to be comfortable enough with the rest of your team to kind of let it go. I was also in a major change in my life where I was having my first child. I know everybody's working hard, but there is something about the person who's carrying the number and making sure everybody's getting paid. It does burn you out after sort of 6-7 years. Any startup does. So it's sort of what it seemed about the right time to sort of recharge my engine and kind of take us through this new course.
Okay, great. So you left Hyperoffice, replaced yourself as CEO. So then you went on to CoFoundersLab. How did that come about?
So just quick correction. My role wasn't CEO at Hyperoffice, but it was at CoFoundersLab. So with CoFoundersLab, I kind of started to have these, the startup scene, unlike today where in most cities, even second tier cities, there's some startup scene, there's a co-working space, accelerator, probably a founder institute chapter happening. Maryland and even DC was just sort of barren. Like it's a conservative town, a lot of folks doing government contract work, and we just didn't have a startup scene. And I knew I was going to be there for the foreseeable future, and I wanted to do something about it. I started reminiscing about San Francisco and sort of how the startup scene was there. And I was like, I just want to help create a startup scene. And I wanted, and this was back in, let's call it about 2009 or so, 2008, when I started thinking about it. And remember, the economy was in the tank. Yeah. And I wanted to be part of the comeback story. How do we create jobs for America? And I knew from the research at the Kauffman Foundation that the net new job growth was coming from new companies. So how do we get new companies to come out? I thought startups was the answer. But the problem is the startups, 80-some% of them are failing, 85% of them are failing. And having studied economics in school, I was like, this is crazy. Like, people are starting new angel funds, new early VC seed funds. They're creating more co-working spaces, more accelerators into a system that's got an 85% failure rate. If you were running a business, you would never put another dollar into that business. So I thought to myself, well, I could just be another input to the system and maybe create a co-working space accelerator. Or a more efficient way about it is, let me just go plug the leakiest pipe in the system. Did some research, found Dr. Norm Wasserman at Harvard. Turns out the biggest reason these companies were failing were founder-related issues. And I thought, what if I could find a way to get the right people to start companies together? Kind of like Match.com was doing. Right. So that's sort of, in a lot of these, I think it's always a slow hunch. It wasn't like that moment, overnight, I'm sitting in there, 12 at midnight. It's sort of this slow hunch. And I said, why don't we come up with a better way to match founders? I experimented with a meetup. And it ended up, now it's one of the largest meetups in the world. So the meetup was
how it started?
The meetup was how it started because I wanted to do an experiment.
So what was the meetup like?
It was a meetup where I begged a Barnes and Noble to let me have a free event there.
I like that.
And they said, we're not really supposed to have events unless it's like a book club. And I was like, wink, wink, we're going to read a couple books afterwards. And they let me do it. And everybody was like, this is great. I met my co-founder there, Cullen Tate. And after that, I went to the local economic development office. I said, look, you guys got to get that startup thing going. Here's one way to do it. Why don't you let me host some events here? And after a couple of them, I found out like people were coming down from Baltimore. Next thing you knew, they were coming in from up from North Carolina, New York. And so we started just replicating those. But here's the key is when you're building like a web service.
But this wasn't a web service at this point yet.
No, it's still just a
meetup.
It's just
talk about an MVP. Like, this is, everyone, I need to build this platform, I need a developer, I need a technical co-founder. Like, this is the MVP.
This was the MVP.
You convinced a Barnes and Noble, you went on the ground, you just tested it and built the model, in the trenches.
Exactly. So it was just an offline. It's nothing more than a facilitated networking event. I mean, we've tuned it, we've made more improvements. It's running in 40 cities now. There's hundreds of companies that have developed, formed, and launched because of it. But it was now most of the action is happening online. Right. But going back to the event, and I had been in the software business, and that's all I really know is I've been in the software industry for about 20 years now. And you're a lot of people I think are quick to go and design the software. You got to figure out how does it happen in the real world? What questions do they ask? I would listen to the questions people were asking, and those showed up as the fields that I would put on the profile when you were creating an online profile.
Yeah.
I went and found out how Match.com was doing. I brought the former chief technology from Match.com as an advisor. Say, how do we go about creating this algorithm?
Creating it online.
Creating
to
it
replicate the art or science you had kind of manifested in these offline meetups.
Exactly. How do we replicate that online? So you got to start in the offline world and then figure out how you can move it online.
Right. All right, I like that. So let's take a quick break for our sponsor. But when we get back, I want to hear how you took this offline group and made it this online platform, how you grew it so quickly, and eventually what happened between CoFoundersLab and OneVest. So
let's do it.
In a minute, we'll be right back.
This is Ambition Today with Kevin Siskar. We'll be right back.
Today's sponsor of Ambition Today is Audible.com. Visit audibletrial.com/ambition today to download and keep any audiobook for free and begin your free 30-day trial. I just want to say I just finished listening to An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth by Chris Hadfield, and talk about a guy who has ambition and wants to overcome fear. He was literally blinded by his own tears during a spacewalk because there's no gravity, and he still finished the spacewalk. It's an incredible book. You can go get it now at audibletrial.com/ambition today to download and listen for free. Shahab, while I have you here, I just wanted to say, so are you reading any books right now?
Yes, I am. I'm currently reading The World is Flat by Thomas Friedman.
And how many books are you in the middle of right now?
Probably like 3, maybe even 4 if you count the one I'm probably not going to go back to.
At least you admitted it, that you're not going to go back to it. That's basically what happened, and that's sort of how I found Audible. Is I was in the middle of like 5 books, but I had to commute every day. I had about a half hour on the subway in New York, and I switched from books to audio because you can use your hands, you can walk around, you can be on the subway, commuting, driving your car. And I just started crushing my shelf of library books that were just sitting there half unread. So I think I ripped through Physics of the Future, the Steve Jobs book, which I was like stuck in the middle of for like a year. But yeah, I definitely recommend to try audible.com for your commute.
Thank you. Well, I'll check it out.
All right, awesome. And now back to this episode of Ambition Today.
You're listening to Ambition Today. Visit us now at siskar.co.
And we're back to this episode of Ambition Today. We're here with Shahab Kaviani. So Shahab, before we left, we were talking about CoFoundersLab, and it was an offline meetup, but I know that it's a massive online platform and really successful. So how did you go from an offline meetup to this online platform?
Well, I knew that was where the future was going to be. Initially, it was mostly motivated by sort of a social service to the local economy and helping accelerate startups. But I had a hunch that we would be able to maybe scale this thing after like probably the first half dozen events. And when we wanted to create the online platform, I was still working full time. I had taken a 1 year sort of break from startups while my first son was born. And I worked there exactly 1 year. I promised my wife I would give it 1 year. And like literally day 365, I was on a plane and talking with VCs in Menlo Park. So Cullen, who I had met, we organized, was on the tail end of his startup. Actually, he had just recently exited his startup. And he had his MBA, he knew how to run companies. He had run a company for over a decade. And we started talking about doing something together, which ended up becoming CoFoundersLab. And so he would come over once a week. We'd meet, in my building. And after I was working, a long day, taking care of the kid. And then at night, I had a contractor, a few programmers in India. And for a few reasons, one, it was a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And secondly, it was actually on the right time because I was working from like 9 p.m. till like 3 a.m. in the morning on the startup. So in the evenings, I was sketching out, prototyping, building the online platform. And I got a beta, just a pilot group of users, called about 50 people. Really did a good job interviewing them, tweaking the product because I had some product management experience. And from there, we decided, well, we were going to try to do this kind of bootstrap. Cullen was like all about bootstrapping, and I was thinking that it needs to be venture backed. And then it became more clear because CoFoundersLab was not going to, I didn't feel comfortable charging anybody until the matches started happening and there was a large enough base of people. So it's kind of unique in that sense where if you build some products, let's say like an Evernote, the user is getting utility right off of that interaction. Well, mine is basically a vertical social network.
The chicken and the egg problem.
Yeah, it's like it's the network effect. So you have to have enough people in there in order to charge for it. So we knew that we had to sort of buy some time, figure it out. And so we went into an accelerator in DC. And the main reason I went into an accelerator was those are my customers, founders. So I wanted to see how they work and how they think. I didn't have to go into an accelerator. We had sort of a network of investors and had done it before. But
go where your customer is.
Go with them and sort of be in the bunker with them for like 6 months. So that made a lot of sense. They, between them, I had some other investors and some other angel investors, and we really caught a break. Actually, I knew there was another company called TechCofounder.com, which I realized sort of, in the process that they were doing this. I started talking with them. I knew their investor, and we were able to work a deal where we actually acquired them. And so we sort of overnight, we had this whole huge base of members, and not just any member. Those are sort of the hot chicks in the ecosystem, right? When you're building particularly tech startups, everybody's looking for the tech co-founder. So we had this huge group of technical people who wanted to be co-founding a startup.
Yeah, that's great. All the business people are like, I need a CTO, I need a technical co-founder. So yeah, that's the...
Yeah, so that really helped. We were able to parlay that into some publicity, get into TechCrunch, and slowly just started the membership base. And the way that we did it was we just went region by region. So you just gotta do things that don't scale sometimes. We just went city by city because what I figured out was that through the Match.com advice is that around 1,000 people in like a node is where is sort of where the market starts to clear. So I wasn't going after I wasn't advertising in all these cities. I would just go in concentric circles, DC, Philly, go out to New York, Charlotte, Chicago. You see how that sort of wraps around our country. And before you knew it, we were sort of planting into each city. We would come in, we'd say, hey, we're going to host an event. We'd hook up with the ecosystem. So the events
still played a big role years
The
later.
events still do play a big role. Every quarter in most cities in New York, because it's big, we're in Brooklyn and Midtown, so it's like every other month we're here. So yeah, the events are a big piece of it, where you got to get out and touch and feel and demonstrate to the ecosystem that you're here to stay and that you're really genuine and you're doing it to really accelerate venture formation. So those are some of the ways that we sort of scaled it. I think our key partners were helpful. And then I also found a business to business way to get us some runway, so we weren't just relying on the freemium model, because we knew the freemium model was going to take a while. In fact, I didn't charge for like the first year and a half or two.
Right.
And so I found a way to license the platform, and I went to NYU, Columbia University, Harvard, and it's a long list of universities that would license the platform. So I had this business to business licensing funding our sort of runway to do the B2C model, and that sort of worked.
So, okay, great. So then what was because CoFoundersLab is still going. What was the peak point of it? And then can you tell me a little bit about what happened with OneVest and that story?
I think CoFoundersLab's peak point was we got to enough cities that were dense enough with enough startup activity that we could create a business model around it. I mean, we were starting to get to love Tampa, love the people in Tampa, but there just wasn't enough density in Tampa. So once we started to get to Tampa, we started going international, Singapore, London, Sao Paulo, some big cities. But we weren't able to grow. The business model just didn't lend itself to getting into more cities. We also started to get our alumni of CoFoundersLab. They were starting to say, hey, we need help raising capital. And because we were really servicing, we didn't go into San Francisco until like year 3, I think. So we were trying to sort of serve everywhere else. How do we get them resources in Charlotte, in Houston, wherever? And so they matched up. They started their company like, hey, we're at a point where we need capital. So I saw the Jobs
and that kept happening over and over.
It kept happening over and over. And the VC is just such an exclusive club. Like if you're not in New York, San Francisco, and Boston, it's hard to get capital. Angel investing is still in its early days, even with AngelList and all that. And the Jobs Act, which is these new laws that sort of loosened the SEC's grips on how you can advertise for funding, started to change. So I saw this as an opportunity. And my plan initially was to go and do equity crowdfunding. But the law was changing, and I knew that by the time the law changed, I needed to be laced up on the court, ready to play, and have that investor base to get into this market.
Yeah, because there was massive companies doing that. Everybody was just taking all the money. Oh, as soon as the law changes, we'll be there ready. So yeah, everyone was kind of arming up.
Everybody was arming up, and
the SEC took their time.
They sure did, and they still are. And in most ways, they still are. I mean, Title III never. They skipped to Title IV. We're still waiting for Title III. That really opens things up. But Title II was a big advancement. We were actually technically the first to publicly advertise we were raising capital, which was what Title II allowed you to do.
Okay.
You still had to raise it from accredited investors. So I did a tweet at midnight when that law changed. The New York Times picked it up, and we got a lot of publicity out of it. And so you got to be thinking as a founder, like what's newsworthy? I'm going to do something that's strategic to my company and make it newsworthy, right? Kind of like the tech co-founder acquisition, kind of like the Jobs Act, the Title II. And so I knew we needed to get there quickly. I also recognized that we were really good at building communities, and that's really the culture of people. Everybody I brought on wanted to be part of the community. We had 50 volunteers at the time, more now. And we wanted to create this community, and we were good at that, but we weren't really strong at tech. We didn't really need to be, because we were just making connections. We didn't have to be like tech heavy. So as a founder, you got to figure out what do you need to be really excellent at. And so we kind of, got by on the tech side, and it was still offshore. Well, there was a group in New York who was actually very strong in tech, which is now OneVest here, still running. They just closed a $2 million Series A round using the OneVest platform, which is pretty awesome. That just happened in this summer of 2015. And so this group had a really strong technical staff, great leaders. We sort of, we connected on helping democratize business formation and getting smart people, talented people, no matter where they live, the resources they need. And so we started meeting. We'd meet in Philly. It was like halfway. And we started talking about, hey, do our cultures fit? How complementary are we from a management team, from a staff? And we decided to do a merger. And so CoFoundersLab is now a OneVest company. And they also had about, at the time, maybe 10,000 angel investors already registered on their platform. So sort of, got us, saved us a lot of time, jumped right in, made a lot of sense. And now OneVest is out, going after it and helping fund deals. They're in a curated model, which is unlike AngelList. It's a curated equity crowdfunding platform, meaning they selectively choose a small number of tech companies primarily, and then they connect them with angel investors, most of which who aren't in the cool kids club in San Francisco or in Boston, that are just, the dentist down the road who wants to invest in this new asset class.
Great. So CoFoundersLab and OneVest merged, and then where did that put you?
So I was that was in the summer of 2014. I helped sort of integrate the companies, and we saw that the real big business is going to be on the equity crowdfunding side. I felt like we had a good team, and sort of I was into my year, going into about year 5 with CoFoundersLab. And again, you have to have like self-awareness, and I'm a builder. I like that sort of lift off where it's really hard. How do you get this heavy plane off the ground with very little fuel and one propeller? Right. Like figuring those sort of things out. Once we kind of get into sort of scaling things, is when it's sort of time for me to kind of work on the next challenge. So it was the right time, and I had a great team around me. And so CoFoundersLab really kind of became a deal flow, if you will, to the main business. It's still a hardy, vibrant community and growing. A couple thousand new founders coming on every month around the world. So I stayed on for 6 months, make sure everything was really gelled and the right people were sitting in the right seats. And then I went off and started my next startup, which is called Breezio.
Okay, great. So let's dive into Breezio then. So what is Breezio?
So Breezio is a collaboration platform for the research community. So we lead the world. The United States leads the world in scientific research. We do about $500 billion of research a year. And as you can tell, I'm a bit of a social entrepreneur. I want to make an impact. And you could be an individual researcher. I could, my father was a physician. I could, and I was really in tune with sort of health problems and all that. And I think, I could be an individual contributor, or we could use technology to help all the scientists that are out there, the millions of scientists that are out there, to help them do their job better. In a way, Kevin, I've sort of made a living off the same thing, just in different ways. I mean, the Hyperoffice was about bringing people together to work more efficiently in sharing information. CoFoundersLab was about bringing people together to launch new businesses. And Breezio is about bringing scientists together to innovate and discover faster and share information. So we sort of took everything we learned from Hyperoffice and applied that in a very niche version of this collaboration platform to the research community, where they can comment on research articles, they can publish research materials that aren't necessarily approved by a publishing platform. So we're trying to turn the publishing industry, the research industry, on its head, where it's sort of the mighty big bad publishers who approve very few people, or very few
as far as scientific research.
As far as scientific research, is a very small percentage. But then there's this whole, under the tip of the iceberg, there's all this knowledge that's not coming into public domain because it's not being approved, but it's really sound work. So we think that the community, rather than a publisher at the top of the food chain, can endorse and validate how accurate the content is.
Yeah,
and that's sort of that's the vision of Breezio.
I love that. I actually, back in college, I had an idea similar to that before I knew what even startups or venture capital was. But yeah, that's incredible, and I think that's great because it takes years for, like, if you cured cancer tomorrow, it would take years before anyone knew about it, and it was published, as they would say. So to speed that process up could literally speed the whole evolution of science and research itself up, which would be incredible.
And the other thing that's happening is, the bigger the problems that you want to work on, whether it's climate change or population or health, they're becoming more and more interdisciplinary. And when the government, who's the largest investor in research, they start to write these grants to say, we need a behavioral scientist and a chemist to solve this problem. So now you got these different institutions, people who speak different languages, that need to share and speak a common language to solve a single point problem. And so that's the opportunity we saw. It's this, we're tapping into team science, is this new way of doing research. And so when I'm starting a new company, I'm trying to find a mega trend that I want to tap into. So what are the headwinds that are out there? So, I saw team science. More scientists were starting to use social media to discover articles and people that they could cooperate with. And I happen to be in the DC metro area, where it's the largest place in the country where federally funded research dollars are spent. So
the Smithsonian's there. There's massive
National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute, and the EPA is there, Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So there's all this research that's happening, and that's an important message I want to pass on to founders, is that try to look at where you are. I mean, if you're in Costa Rica, then grow pineapples. I mean, if you're not don't go and try to be like a health tech company in, Des Moines, Iowa, if that's not their strength. So there are companies, there's some big, there's some other companies that are, vibrant there. You got to get into that ecosystem. So location matters. Figure out, can you, solve a problem that's going to be around for a long time? Look at your geography and your environment, so you have an ecosystem of suppliers, partners, distribution, customers that are around you. And so all of those things kind of made sense. This story of Breezio is actually was unique to me, in that the technology was actually being built for a couple of years. The technical founder that was working on it hadn't figured out an entry into the market. I had been mentoring them for some time, and when I came on, and it was had another name, it was called programming.com. We still have that domain, and it's a peer-to-peer learning platform. I I figured out that platform could be used for the research community.
Yeah.
I also felt like the ed tech space is just so noisy. There's other problems that we could solve. So I sort of basically spent most of this year doing customer development, validation, interviewing the market, interviewing people like at the Naval Research Laboratory, folks in the Department of Defense to figure out, how do you guys do research? How can you do it faster? And they kept telling me, by the time we get a research material that comes out, it's too late. The technology's evolved. So that's sort of how it came about. And the other big thing that's different about this time is I'm not going to be the CEO.
Okay.
I decided I wanted to, for various reasons, including I felt like you had to decide, what do you want to maximize for? So I wanted to maximize for my experience, not necessarily the calories, which a founder has to spend the more calories than anybody else, right? So that's one. The other thing is I'm in an industry that I'm not familiar with. So I can kind of piece together some technology. I knew collaboration, but the industry, the scientific community would never respect me because I knew I didn't have a PhD. I never spent my time there. I didn't understand their problems as well as my CEO, Karen McCord, who spent 2 decades in that industry, was at UPenn, did international research funding, and really understood the problems of that market. And so, put the right person in place and build a team, build a solid team. And I'm really happy with where we are now.
That's awesome. That's incredible, and I can't wait to see what it becomes. All right, cool. So I just want to do one last thing before we wrap up. So we're going to do the Ambition Today question of the day. So this question today is, what do you feel sets you apart from an average person, which has allowed you success?
Well, if I had to, I'm going to kind of just, the grit and perseverance, I think everybody sort of gets that. I think the one that's harder to define, and I think is a little bit sort of unique about me, is the ability to build relationships and identify important relationships. I believe that my biggest asset as an entrepreneur is my network. I'm not smarter than anybody else. Founders that definitely work harder than me. I worked my tail off, but there are others that work harder than me, put in more hours. They have maybe access to funding, but the network is what really I think is the biggest asset that I've been able to develop, and I'm constantly investing in it. I'm giving back into the network, and the network is also serving me.
So not just taking from it, but constantly giving back.
Constantly. I mean, I placed 2 people in jobs this summer, and they call me and they thank me. Thanks for helping me find that job. I've helped 1,000 people find co-founders, but people, I do that offline. So it's coming to Founder Institute. I'm an entrepreneur in residence at Startup Maryland. I teach, I'm an adjunct professor at University of Maryland. I teach entrepreneurship. I mean, that's not the highest paying job, but I do that because I feel fulfillment by giving back to the next generation of entrepreneurs who are the change makers and the best hope we have for a better world. And I'm also building an amazing network. I mean, it's talented kids that are going to be building their own company in a few years from now. So I'm constantly investing in building a network, and I would say that's really the thing that has been an edge for me in my career.
All right, great. Well, I want to thank you for coming on this episode of Ambition Today. Thank you.
It was awesome being here. Thanks so much, Kevin.
Where can people go to find out more about Breezio, CoFoundersLab, anything you'd like to plug?
Sure. So you can follow me at Kaviani S. That's my last name, Kavianis, Kaviani S on Twitter, and you'll get a link to some more about my bio there. Breezio.com is Breezio.com. If you're a researcher or work in a research-intensive industry, check it out. And go to OneVest if you're interested in investing or raising capital. And CoFoundersLab.com is there. It's a free service. There's entrepreneurs all around the world. There's advisors that can help join you and give you some guidance. And thanks for giving me a chance to introduce some of those resources out there for entrepreneurs.
All right. Thank you again. Incredible story. And I hope to see you on a future episode. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
See you guys next time on Ambition Today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ambition Today with your host, Kevin Siskar. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit www.siskar.co. We'll catch you next time.